You've heard of the rings of power? Well, guess what? I've got the sleeves of power. That's right. So large they have the power to bend the entire universe to my will. Ha 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 ha. Sauron ain't got nothing on me. Hey y'all, Jackie here and welcome to Fantastical Follies where we goof off and sew things. Today we're making an 1830s ball gown, but spooky. That's right my friends, we are about to get batty with some power sleeves. Okay, so I've been talking about this project for a while. I got the idea last year doing an Instagram event called Fall for Costume, hosted last year by Red Threaded. At the time I had precisely one historical costume, but wanted to participate the best I could. So for one of the prompts, which was orange, I think, I found some loose orange ribbon covered in bats. Not sure how or why my brain went to 1830s hair, but it did, and I put together this look in about 10 minutes. Commence obsession. Fast forward a year later and I'm finally getting a chance to work on this thing. Now, I've had the fabric for this project for a while, but with work and festival season and a couple of last minute projects, I only got started on this costume about 2 weeks before this video is airing. That's right. I gave myself 2 weeks to make, film, and edit the video. Will I actually get it finished in time to get this video out? You'll have to keep watching to find out. As of the time I'm filming this, I actually don't know. The gown is together except for the hem, but the spooky stuff is currently in pieces on my ironing board. I feel like this is the third project in a row that I've been super slammed to get finished. It's to be expected with everything going on right now, but how about giving this video a like if you're looking forward to seeing me a little bit calmer in the next video. The pattern. I'm using black snails number 0317, the 1830s evening dress pattern to make this. I don't plan on following it exactly. I'm going to use it as a base to make my own creative decisions. I'm opting for bodice view B, but sleeve option A. As much as I like the view B sleeves, they're very complicated and this is not the project for it. I'll also be using black snails 1830s undergarment pattern to make the sleeve supports. However, I'll be using my reversible Regency long stays underneath since I intentionally made those stays to do double duty between my Regency zombie project and this one. These stays are good through the 1830s, so it's perfect. And if you want to see the making of those, a link to my Regency zombie playlist is in the card above my head, as well as in the description below. I may end up down the line doing the full 1830s kit, but only if I decide to come back to this era sometime in the future. This is more of a one-off thing to have fun before I dive deep into the 17th century. The plan. As always, I want this costume to do double duty. 1830s fashion is so outrageous and ridiculous that there's not much from this costume I can wear in everyday life. I mean, can you imagine me rocking an Apollo knot at the office? So what I'm going to do is make a straight ball gown and do all the batty bits in a way that's removable so that if I wanted to wear this to other events, I have two options. I bought some cool flocked black and gold lace in a bat design that's going to be the base for my decorations, but what else I end up doing is going to evolve naturally as I work. Okay, so I'm really pressed for time and y'all don't actually want to sit here and listen to me ramble, so let's just get started. First order of business was to make the sleeve puffs. These little thingies go on your arm and get tied to the corset to help keep those massive 1830 sleeves as poofy as possible. Now, I was originally planning on using some orange fabric from my stash for the puffs, and since to me these things look like swimmies and they were going to be orange anyway, I did a poll on Instagram to see if I should indeed make them really look like swimmies. Unsurprisingly, most of you thought it was a great idea and only a few thought I was crazy, although my mother was one of those few. So I set about cutting them out. Then it was time to decorate. Here is my completed puff. I've got little Nemo guys on this one. This one, he's got some kind of Habsburg chin thing happening on it. I don't know what I did. I just freehanded this and I wasn't really trying to make it perfect. So he looks a little goofy, but that's okay. Also, I need to commend past Jacki for just buying paint with glitter on it all of the time. I don't know if you can see, but the black and the orange are both glitter paint, so sparkles. Here's the other one. I decided to not make them match. This is my little octopus guy. I think he's super cute too. A little less glittery. I do think that I went a little too far down with my design. I'll make it work. In the end, it doesn't really matter. I mean, this is underwear. I'm doing this for me to have fun, not necessarily to be perfect, you know, so it's all good. Now, I have allotted myself the next half an hour to get as much done as I possibly can. I'm hoping to get everything finished to the point that it's ready to be stuffed. Whether or not I can make that work, I don't know, but fingers crossed, let's get going. First order of business, run a line of basting stitches along both top and bottom edge of each puff, stopping at the stuff line on each side. Then line all the markings of the back up with the markings of the front and gather to fit. Place them right sides together and pin, making sure you stop at the stuffing point. Then go ahead and stitch the seams. Okay, here's the first time the instructions start to confuse me. They say to pull one end of the tube through without twisting, lining up the short edges right side together. So leaving an opening on the inner puff. Turn the right way out. Bzz? I noodled and noodled over this and eventually had to step away. It made no sense. After a while, I did some rereading and there is a blog with further information, which thankfully had a photo I was able to figure out. So basically what you're going to do is reach in like you're turning it out, but stop when the edges meet. Then you'll pin the seam allowance, but leave, say, 2/3 of one side open. Then you'll stitch and turn them out through the hole. Then you'll grab your handy dandy fiber fill and stuff the puffs. Woohoo! It is romantic skivvies time. Well, Regency skivvies doing double duty. I'm in my skivvies because I just did my first mock-up for this dress and it doesn't fit. Well, technically it does fit. The arm size are great. The shoulder strap is perfect length. It's actually a little bit too big in the back. I could probably take it in by 1/4 of an inch and have a really nice line, but I'm getting a gap in the front predictably because my measurements are always disproportionate because they make all these patterns for people with B cups and I am not a B cup. I need to fix the pattern. Ideally, if I had time, I would manipulate the bust dart and get it right. I only need about 3/4 of an inch in the waist, but I need a full 1.5 inches in the top of my bust. I don't have time to do that. So I am just going to do what I know how to do and hope that it's best. Okay, so here's the plan. Because the arm side fits nicely and the shoulder strap fits nicely, I don't want to extend this at the sides. That would be the easiest thing to do and not mess up the proportions at all. But again, like I don't want to fiddle with any kind of drafting with the arm size. That's always a pain in the butt. So what I'm going to do is I am going to slash and spread right before the bust dart toward the center front. I'm going to extend it the half distance of what I need. So I need 1.5 inches, right? So that's going to be 3/4 of an inch because this is going to be doubled. And then I will use the dart to pull it in at the waist so that I get a smaller waist than bust ratio. Now, normally if you were drafting this, you would divide that 1.5 inches around the front and the back, but like I said before, the back is actually a little bit big because my back is narrow and my bust is large. So I'm just going to use the front and I think it's going to work. Hopefully. Wish me luck, y'all. I just added a strip of fabric to the center front to extend out my center line. I got this. All right, so I am getting a little bit of wrinkling here, but that will go away once I get the skirts on for sure. I do have to take this up considerably in the waist, obviously, but they do give you a 2-inch seam allowance on the bottom here intentionally to do that. Otherwise, I think it's good. Now, I did end up extending the sides by about 1/2 inch in the front. I had done that previously and not realized it before. Not sure, but I definitely need that to get it closed. I've also decided that this is going to be front closing. I can't get this closed in the back unless there's a zipper, and I don't want to put in a zipper. So I just purchased some hook and eye tape and we're gonna go with it. We're gonna make it work. So I think we're good to go. I'm gonna transfer all of my markings to the actual pattern and get it cut out. To change the back opening to a front opening, I took the exact measurements of the back closure and transferred them directly onto the front. So what'll happen is one side of the center front will lap over the other side, and also hook and eye tape to each side to make easy work of it. I measured all of the distances and then transferred them to the front of the pattern. Then I extended out the front facing piece by the same exact amount and reduced the size of the back facing piece, again by the same amount. Okay. It is 6:45 on Thursday evening. There are two things that I think are going to be particularly difficult. One of them is cutting everything out correctly, and the other one is assembling the bodice. I have dedicated this evening to doing the former, something which has been completely screwed over by the fact that I got home from my run and proceeded to lock my car keys in my car. Thankfully, the 75-minute wait time was more like a half an hour, but I am almost an hour behind now and freaking out hardcore. So the cute thing that I had planned to explain all of this to you is going to have to go by the wayside because I need to get this done before my brain stops working. And I'll see y'all on the flip side. This pattern doesn't include all of the pieces you need to cut out. There are a lot of odd rectangles and strips you have to measure out and cut, as well as your regular pattern pieces. Are you ready, Sally, for the list of pieces you need to cut out and take with you to school today? In your contrasting color, you need 1 3/8 inches by 4 yards of bias tape for piping, 4 4x28 inch and 4 4x12 inch bias tape for bodice trimmings, 1 2-inch by 20-inch stripe on the straight grain. Don't cut two like I did here. In your main color, you need 2 4x28 inch and 4 4x12 inch bias tape for bodice trimmings, a 16 by 28 inch bias cut rectangle for the bodice, 2 rectangles cut with a length of 40 inches for the skirt. Okay, that's all. Don't forget your apple, sweetie. Time for assembly. Finally! I started making all my lines on the bodice front. Since my toile ended up fitting pretty well, I'm using it as my lining. Now this sort of threw me off because you're going to build half the bodice using your 4-inch bias strips, so even though you haven't cut out anything that looks like a bodice front, do not fear. It will work out. Going slightly out of order, I flatlined the sleeves to the sleeve lining and basted them together very carefully. I then marked the seam allowance on the top and the bottom and stitched them down. Now, time to cartridge pleat. I marked using just a basic ballpoint pen every 1/4 inch. I will then hand baste 2 rows of stitches along the seam allowance using waxed doubled thread for strength. Repeat for the top. If you couldn't tell by my lovely wristbands in the previous footage, I am festivaling it out this weekend. Yesterday, I did not get as much done as I had hoped, mostly because my serger decided to stop working. The tension is off. I can't get it to work. However, I did take some hand sewing with me to the festival yesterday. I got 1 sleeve, top and bottom, completely basted for cartridge pleating. The other one will probably get done this afternoon. I also managed to finally sew up my sleeve puffs. Now this is as far as I can get with the puffs until I get some tape or something. I now have an hour and a half before I have to start making my way back down to the festival. One of my favorite bands is playing this afternoon and I want to be close, so I had hoped to get started earlier today and that didn't happen. I'm just moving slow. It's a lot to do, especially this time of year. I am just going to shut the camera off and try to get her done. Hopefully this goes well, but this is the most difficult part of the gown I'm anticipating, and this is the only time this week that I'm going to have the mental alacrity to noodle it out. So I really need to just focus and achieve it, or this gown is not going to get done in time. So wish me luck, y'all. I'll catch back with you in a little bit. Hello! It is now Tuesday evening. I just got back from my run, which is why I am so red in the face and I sound so weird. Sorry, y'all. It is peak allergy season here where I live, and running outside in the dirt, inhaling all of those spores always makes me sound a little weird. I would like to talk about the things that I have done on this bodice so far. I took all of my stuff with me to the festival on Sunday and promptly dropped my thimble in the security line and didn't realize until I was in the festival, and then lost my needle about 10 minutes later. So I got no sewing done and my thimble is gone, which I'm devastated about. I have tiny little hands. If any of you know of anywhere online that sells reasonably priced thimbles in size 5, please let me know. I have ordered some from Etsy, but let's talk about this bodice. So the first thing I needed to do was attach the shoulder seams with the front and the back. I did the same with the facing. Now, for some reason, I was thinking the facing actually went on the outside of the bodice. It does not, it goes on the inside of the bodice. I should have anticipated that given that it's called a facing, but there you go. So the next thing I needed to do was make piping. I really didn't want to do this. I really did not want to deal with the piping, but I couldn't figure out how they had finished the upper edge of all of the bodice, and it was piping, so I went ahead and did it. So you take the piping that you've made and put it onto the fabric so that the edges match up right sides together, sew it real close to the actual piping, and then flip it over. It took me so long to do this. I was really annoyed. And then the next instructions were to drape all of the bias strips onto the front of your bodice, starting at the top and working your way down. Now you're supposed to keep the strips at about 5/8 of an inch distance in the center front and center back, and they should go out to a width of 1 inch on the shoulders. I did all of that, and between the piping nonsense and the pinning, it was the hour and a half I had allotted to do the entire bodice nonsense. And then promptly realized that the next instructions are to remove everything you just pinned and sew on the first strip. Are you kidding me? I just wasted so much freaking time. In any case, so what you have to do to sew the bias strips on is lift up the flap and sew 1/4 inch away from the fold. This is not easy, so I'm gonna go down onto the board and show you how I actually do this process. First, take one of your strips. You'll start with the long strips at the top and alternate colors. Starting at the center front and giving yourself some ample seam allowance on the end, line up the next strip, making sure it's 5/8 of an inch below the previous one. Pin using a silk pin. You really want to use something with a tiny head because you're going to leave the pins in to sew on the machine.
Hey, this might be a good look for me.
I picked a random spot on the shoulder where I wanted the 1 inch to be and marked it equally on both sides, as well as a spot about 2.5 inches further toward the center back where I wanted it to begin to recede again. Continue the pinning and then snip at the center back, again giving yourself ample seam allowance. You'll want to stop sewing at least 1/2 inch before the center back seam on all strips. You'll see why later. Then repeat on the other side of the bodice. Now take your pin strips and prepare to sew. Flip up the top edge, leaving the pins in, and place under the machine so the pin is about 1/4 inch away from the needle. Begin to sew. Go slow and take your time. As I'm doing this, I do need to say that these strips really want to be hand sewn. I got a lot of puckering and tucks on my lining that are going to alter my fit. If you're not pressed for time like I am, take the time to sew these with a running stitch by hand. You'll have a much more beautiful outcome than I did. I am really on a time crunch for this and did not realize how difficult this project was going to be. I have learned my lesson, and let's see if I can get through it. I basted down the bottom bias strip to the lining. I then needed to finish the back edge of the strips. I trimmed each piece, leaving about a 3/8 inch seam allowance over the center back seam. Then I folded and tucked each strip in turn, being careful to make sure each strip matched the one across from it. I pinned everything down for hand sewing. Next, to drape the front using the large bias rectangle. Cut your pattern at the indicated spot and fold away the darts. Since I'm doing a front closure, I'm cutting the rectangle in half. Don't do this if you're sticking to the back closure. Cut your rectangle to fit the pattern, leaving a 3/8 inch seam allowance only at the top. Drape and pin your fabric to the front until it's smooth and looks nice. My own ineptitude is getting in the way here, so let's move on. Off camera, I hand stitched the back edges closed using a tunnel stitch. I also cut off the excess bias strip ends from the arm size. I hand stitched the bodice fronts to the lining and hand basted them to the arm size and the sides. Then I hand tacked the seam allowances down on the inside. I ended up tacking them too far inward, but I'll end up fixing it later. Okay, now we need to deal with the bodice back. I really could not wrap my head around what the instructions wanted me to do here. Originally, I was thinking that since I'm not having a center back seam, I'd cut the back portion on the fold like I'm showing you here. Don't forget to add seam allowance to the top. Drape and pin much like the front. As you can see, I'm having issues with it puckering in the center where it dips, so I end up cutting that center back anyway. It's annoying that I have another seam to stitch, but it was the right decision for sure. Okay, here's my solution to the tape ties for the sleeve puffs. Using some contrasting fabric, I'm making my own little ties torn on the straight grain. I'm ironing in and folding them under, then sewing them shut. This is way more fiddly than I anticipated, and I sort of lost interest halfway, but we'll get there eventually. Gotcha! All right, I have a confession to make. This fabric is not fun. I mean, I don't regret buying it at all because it's what I could afford, but it feels so plasticky. The orange is much better than the ivory. The ivory is just atrocious. It's like working with one of those nylon parachutes, you know, the ones that you had like in gym class in 2nd grade. But there is a fun thing about it. I will say also, you can't really see it on camera, but this orange is actually two-tone, and it has like a kind of a reddish orange and then like a lighter tangerine on the other like warp and weft, and it's really pretty. So anyway, just thought I'd interrupt the regular scheduled program to moan and praise the fabric that I'm working with. Moving on, here's the completed stitching on the back. It's finally starting to look like a real article of clothing. I also hand basted the sides. Since I still don't have the energy to deal with my serger, I serge stitched the edges of the arm side. Note, I did this before I sewed the side seams because I thought it'd be easier, and I was right. In this view, you can really see all the puckering happening on the inside lining from machine stitching those strips. Next order of business is marking the seam allowances on the arm size. It's at this point I realize I'm really going to need to clip the heck out of those curves. Then I pinned the sides together, making sure the arm size matched, and basted everything together. I tried the bodice on my body to test the fit. I also marked the bottom edge, which should be 3/8 of an inch above your natural waistline. I checked the measurements, found an average, and trued up the edge before cutting to the seam allowances. This was also the point where I realized I had turned in the front edges too much, so I went ahead and fixed that too. Time to prep the cuffs. First, flatline them. Mark seam allowances on both sides. The instructions want you to add piping, but I opted to skip the piping on all the rest of the edges for time. Turn over and press on one side. Stitch that down and then fold the cuff in half and stitch to make a ring. Time for the fun part, the cartridge pleating. Seriously, there's something so satisfying about pulling the thread and making all those tiny little pleats. As of right now, I'm following the instructions that say to place the wrong side of the cuff to the right side of the sleeve. I'm lining up the finished edge of the cuff with the finished edge of the sleeve. This is how the directions want you to do it. Pin the cuff to the sleeve starting at the bottom where there isn't going to be any pleating. Then start pulling your threads until the inside of the sleeve fits the cuff. Look at all those tiny ickle pleaties! Once it's done, all you have to do from there is hand sew the pleats down to the cuff, making sure you sew twice into each pleat. Then to fit the sleeve into the arm side, baste in the arm side edges first. You can see in this view how much I clipped the curves. Mark your center and then, like the cuff, pin the sleeve to the arm side, matching the seams and center mark. You're going to do this right sides together. Again, like the cuff, the underside portion of the sleeve isn't pleated, so pin that bit down first and then commence the pleating. Hand stitch just like the cuff. I did end up flipping the cuff so that it turned down instead of staying over the bottom of the sleeve like I'm showing you here. I then ended up finishing the edges with piping after all because I thought it needed a little something there. It didn't take too long since it was such a small area. I'm sure you're asking yourself right now, hey Jackie, what are you doing? Are you adding 1770s pocket slits to your 1830s ball gown? And the answer to that question is a resounding hell yes. I want pockets in this gown. This isn't my era, so if you know the answer to this assumption, please let me know in the comments. But at this point, I think we're still using reticules and not doing pockets in gowns at all. I could just add normal pockets to this, but I don't trust the structure of the fabric to hold up to me constantly pulling on them, so I just decided to utilize my 18th century pockets. After all, nobody is going to see them under there, and if anyone gives me a hard time about having pocket slits in this gown because it's not historically accurate, I will kick them in their private area. Anyway, sew the sides together. If you're doing a back closure, do your back vent in the skirt. I'm skipping that and going to have a side closure. You'll see that later. Ha! You've heard of the rings of power? Well, guess what? I've got the sleeves of power. That's right. So large they have the power to bend the entire universe to my will. Ha 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 ha. Sauron ain't got nothing on me. All right, so I have one sleeve on. I'm pretty happy with it. It's nice and puffy. I do not have the puff support underneath this. I still haven't sewn the ties on yet. We're getting there. I am having a little thing happening here that's weird with the front tape. That's easy enough thing to fix. I am dealing with some of this weird bubbling off the shoulder. It wasn't really doing this when it was just the linen mock-up. I don't know how to fix it. If anybody does know how to fix it, let me know in the comments below. The only thing I can think about is to take the entire thing apart and take it in here. And I am 100% not willing to do that. We are going to go ahead and finish getting all of the pleats set. It's Friday evening, by the way. I have a concert tonight, so I don't know how much I'm gonna get done, but I have dedicated tomorrow to trying to finish as much as I possibly can. I never imagined there was going to be so much hand sewing. I should have known, but I did not anticipate it. So I'm gonna take my puffy ass power sleeve and go get some stuff done. The instructions give you a very detailed method to measure and calculate your skirt pleats. That's great if your brain works that way, but if you've been around here for a while, you know that I'm much more fond of the divide and conquer method because my insanely dominant right brain is just ill-equipped to handle that much math. My pleats are radiating out to the pockets with a box pleat in the center front and center back. I'm basting it down by hand, and then I'll baste the top by machine to keep it stable. This is where I start to stray from the pattern. I know that I'm not going to be able to get a fully sewn waist on over my larger body bits, so my idea is to make one side open at the pocket slits. I'll then hook and eye them closed so I can wiggle into the skirt. I'm marking 2 inches on each side of the pocket slit. This portion of the skirt will not be sewn onto the bodice. I'm then taking some leftover bias strip pieces and making a waistband facing to cover and keep the pleats stable. This is where I'll sew on my hook and eyes. I'm going to do the same thing to the bodice front, only with a 4-inch strip. I'm going to baste these down and baste down the edges of the bodice at the same time. Also, I'm gonna say it again, I love the color of this fabric. It is gorgeous. Okay, here you can see me turning in the edges of my facings, which I'll hand stitched down. I machine sewed down the eye part of my hook and eye tape. Then I hooked it together to try and get the positioning right. I'm still not sure this is the best method of closure, but it'll work for now. On the flip side, my stripes are now aligned, which they weren't before, so I'm a happy camper. On the inside, I pin the strip down and will hand stitch it down to the fabric so it doesn't show on the front. Then I needed to attach the bodice to the skirt. I basted it right sides together, leaving the front few inches unsewn as well as the left side where I made the facings. The instructions then say to sew a bias strip down to the skirt edge. This will get sewn upward toward the bodice to encase the raw edges. Once that was pinned, I stitched the whole thing together. This is finally starting to look like a gown, y'all. Time to go hand sew all the rest of the bits. Here's the completed inside bias strip sewn down. It makes the seam really thick and you can kind of see it, so I'm not 100% sure it's gonna stay. Here's the hand sewn hook tape as well. All that's left to do is the hem. And now, time for the spooky stuff. Yay! Phew! I thought we'd never get there. Okay, plan for spooky. This is the lace fabric I was talking about earlier. I love this stuff. This stuff was twice as expensive per yard as the other stuff that I bought, but it was so worth it. I bought, I think, 3 yards of it and decided I would use what I could and then supplement with other things. So I have cut 2 panels for a skirt, and this skirt is just going to be a overskirt that I'm going to put on over the gown. I thought that would be the easiest way to do it. So I've got 2 things for that. I've also cut 2 sleeves. I'm gonna do over sleeves. It is almost a shame to cover up the pretty cartridge pleating of my other sleeve, but it's okay. I've also cut 2 strips for the bottom of the sleeve cuffs. Now I am going to leave a small strip of the white cuff visible underneath to give it a little bit of interest. So these are slightly smaller than the original sleeve cuffs. I've also cut some just little strips from the edge of the lace. This is going to be a facing for the top of the sleeve, so I have something to gather it to. I'm not going to do cartridge pleats on the outside sleeves. There's just not enough time, and because it's made out of lace, it's really not structured enough to hold that, so they'll just be gathered, but I need to have to gather it to something, so I just kind of picked some scraps for that. I also have a strip for the waistband for the skirt. Then I bought a 10-yard tube of gold spotted netting. That's this. I've cut 2 strips of it to do the bottom of the skirt. I couldn't make the skirt as long as the gown skirt and do the sleeves at the same time because the sleeves take up so much fabric. So I'm going to do a ruffle of this at the bottom. I just had enough to cut some of this out for a belt and do like slightly more than 2 times the width of the bottom skirt. So that's gonna be that. Now I do think that I'm going to need to have something in between the seam of the top and the bottom. I think you need to break the eye a little bit. So I'm going to use my leftover piping. I have enough to do one side of the skirt, so I only have to cut out 1 more strip and do, you know, another 50 inches of this. And I think I'm going to put that between the 2 layers so that there's something that visibly breaks your eye between the 2 patterns. Otherwise, I think it's going to be too busy. And then I've also cut out, I have not assembled yet, a bunch of white bows from my leftover white fabric. I'm going to do little bats in those. Now, for the sake of time, I am going to film that, but I'm not going to put it in this video. Those are going to be in a shorter video posted at some point, so be on the lookout for that. But you will see the bows, me putting the bows on the skirt at some point. First, I pinned the sides of the skirt, making sure to leave 9 inches opened at the top of each side for the pocket slits. Then I sewed the edges closed. I sewed all of my tulle strips together. Then I basted the top edges of the skirt. I basted the top edges of the strip, and I basted the top and bottom edges of my sleeves. I also sewed the cuffs together. Then I pinned the completed piping to the base of the skirt and basted it. I gathered the strip to the bottom of the skirt. I gathered the skirt to the waistband. I gathered the sleeve bottoms to the cuffs. Happy day after busy season, everyone. I have the day off. This gown is almost complete. All I have left to do is attach the bows to the skirt, and then I am immediately going to go and film the reveal. Yes, it is October 18th and this gown is not done. I have never been this close to the wire and I hate it. Those of you who know me personally know that I am an extremely organized person. I am very good at time management, and this has been the bane of my existence. However, I'm really happy with the way this gown is turning out, so let's turn the camera off, go attach those bows, and get this thing finished. I played around with where I wanted to put the bows. Originally I was going to put them along the bottom ruffle, but I thought it looked a little wonky, so I decided to move them up. I tested 2 different heights and decided that the taller height was better, so that's where we're gonna put all of the bows. Hey, you, come here for a minute. Come closer. That's better. All right, before we get to the fun stuff, can I just be a little honest with y'all right now? Is that okay? I upload every other Thursday. Getting this video out this week has been a challenge. So if you're enjoying this content so far, please let me know either by liking the video, telling a friend, subscribing if you haven't, or even leaving me a little note of encouragement in the comments. Every single one of these actions goes a little bit further to helping me out and letting me know that the sacrifice was worth it. If you're enjoying this content, please let me know. I will be monitoring how this video does quite closely, a lot closer than I usually do on my videos, and its performance is going to determine how much content I put out in subsequent tax seasons. So thanks y'all so much for giving me this little break, and let's try to finish this thing out. Oh my God, I did it. I got it done. I cannot believe that I managed to do this in 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this. I had so much fun. It has been an epic whirlwind and kind of crazy, but I really appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to hang out with me today. I'm so excited about this gown. It definitely has its issues. The tape is not working quite as well as I'd like. I think I'm gonna have to put a couple of snaps just on the front. This is actually sewn shut right now. I think also that I would like to do what I did with the tulle on the belt and face it with some of the white satin. I have a ton of it left. I'm not going to use it for anything else because it's terrible to work with, and I just think that the bottom of the skirt needs a little bit more heft. I think that the netting on its own it's kind of gets lost against the orange, so I think I will probably do that. I'm kind of sad I didn't have time to do my Apollo knot. This this is a little floppy. I gotta fix that. Driving in this was a challenge. I definitely had to make some adjustments. I didn't quite fit in my car. I do drive a compact, so It was fun. I took up the entire car. I had to push this back, which is why it's a little bent. But otherwise, I'm so happy that I went through with this. This gown was harder than I anticipated. Not that it was impossible, not that it was too difficult, but given the time frame that I had allowed myself, it was probably harder than, you know, opting for the other bodice front. But that's okay, you know what, I love it, and I think it's going to be really pretty whether I'm batty or not batty, so it is what it is. I'm going to close it at that. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time. 4 4x28 inch and 4 4x12 4 4x12. Oh my god, I'm confusing myself. Math! Ha! You've heard of the sleeves of power. No, you haven't.